Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Aurelian Part 2, Battle of Immae by HistoryMarche. Last time we saw the build-up to Aurelian's emperorship, and then we saw as he secured his reign over the empire and went east to take on the disloyal Zenobia and her emerging Palmyrene empire. Today we will be continuing that conflict in the east as Aurelian tries to bring Rome back together, reunify the empire. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I would appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon. It is linked down below, and it will give you access to exclusive reaction content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
Following the victory over the Goths in the Balkans, the flagging morale of the Roman forces had been restored, and with a restructured Danubian frontier, Aurelian could now muster strong field armies for the campaigns ahead.
Yeah, Aurelian has sort of been on the up and up. Now, when he took power, Rome was in a significant bit of chaos, you could put it that way. Attacks, well, really from every direction, but attacks on the Italian heartland of the empire, not good at all. Aurelian defended Italy, headed east, defeated the Goths in the Balkans. He did have to give up Dacia, but he just didn't have the resources to keep it. Now, things are seeming a bit better. He's sort of regaining control. The Gallic Empire in the west, it doesn't have the influence and power it once did. Really, though it is still a threat, but the biggest threat is Zenobia and her Palmyrene Empire. And that's exactly where he's heading. But like they said, with some improved morale, now the Romans are starting to believe in themselves again.
Compromising the empire's security. The emperor wintered in Byzantium, making preparations for the upcoming war with Zenobia, and ensuring that the borders would be protected in his absence. Considerable manpower was allocated to defend the Balkans against the tribes from across the Danube.
Right, and of course, these are the considerations that have to be made when the empire is in this state. You cannot afford to round up all the troops from throughout the empire and take them on one campaign, as had been done at more secure and prosperous times throughout the empire's history. Now, of course, there always had to be troops left behind to defend, but what I'm saying is, at times in the past, it was more realistic to round up a pretty high percentage of the available manpower that you had and take them on one campaign. At this point, with so much danger coming from every direction, you need to leave a significant amount of men guarding these different borders. Not just a token defense force, no, a serious defense force. And so obviously that limits the number of men that you can take on this campaign. You know, these are the considerations of empire, and this will continue throughout the rest of Roman history. This is a concern that the Byzantine Empire had to deal with often. You know, it's pretty difficult to mobilize men in the first place, and then even when you have marshaled a large army, you can't afford to take them all with you. They have other concerns to attend to.
Troops were stationed in Italy to prevent a possible return of the Alemanni and the Iotungi. And in Narbonese Gaul, a substantial presence of imperial troops was required to guard against the Gallic Empire. By spring 272, Aurelian had mustered his own army in Thrace and had completed all preparations. Zenobia, seeing that war with Aurelian was now inevitable, had her son Vaballathus declared Augustus and had herself proclaimed Augusta, the traditional title of a Roman empress.
Yeah, so she's dropped the act, right? We saw last episode how even though she was building her own personal power base, even though she was acting very autonomously from Aurelian and the Roman Empire, she tried to put up a facade of loyalty, still pretending, still paying lip service to the centralized Roman government. At this point, she's dropped that. And we also mentioned last time how there were a lot of different titles that the Roman emperor would take, one of which was Caesar, which sort of became known as this junior emperor title. And I mentioned that, you know, the real number one title was Augustus. You know, if you had the title of Augustus, yeah, You were the top guy. You were the emperor, sometimes of a few emperors, at the top. And so, as we can see, she's granted her son that title Augustus, and herself the title Augusta. So, she's dropped all pretenses. She is going straight for independence, basically. Her own empire.
But because of the Palmyrene failure to secure Bithynia, Aurelian was easily able to secure a bridgehead and march into Asia. He sent a second force to make a naval landing in Egypt under the talented Marcus Aurelius Probus, the future emperor.
Yep, there you go. You get a lot of that with this sort of history. Last time we were talking about Gallienus, and then, Claudius pops up, Aurelian pops up. When you have emperors replaced so quickly, and they serve for such a short amount of time, you pretty frequently see future emperors featured in the stories of these past emperors, or present emperors in this case. So there we go, Probus, who will be emperor himself one day. Being sent to Alexandria, sent to Egypt. As we mentioned last time, Egypt was this very important, very prosperous province with a lot of history and a lot of culture. That was somewhere really important to reclaim for, frankly, the prosperity of the entire Roman Empire.
The logistical planning and execution of this invasion marked Aurelian as one of the greatest military thinkers of the 3rd century AD. His plan was a pincer movement on a massive scale, a true masterclass in strategic warfare. This video is brought to you by...
Very smart. And look, if you're gonna be the guy who basically brings this chaotic period to an end, who truly reunifies the empire, then you had better be one of the best military thinkers of your era. Aurelian was. You would also better be someone with a lot of drive, authority, charisma, an ability to command troops, a presence, and Aurelian had all of these things, as far as we're aware. It's not like we have an abundance of sources on really much Roman history. But Aurelian was clearly an intelligent military thinker and a great leader of men. Also, as always, go and check out this video from HistoryMarche. It'll be linked down below. Go give them a like, subscribe, check out their ad, show them support for making these fantastic videos.
Aurelian's war against Zenobia had 2 objectives. The first was to recapture those parts of the empire over which Zenobia had recently established her dominion. The most important of these were the wealthy provinces of Asia Minor, with their significant tax contribution to the coffers of the imperial government, and Egypt, with its vital supply of grain.
Yep. Egypt, especially, like I said, was rather prosperous and had been the breadbasket of the Roman Empire for a while at this point, because of its production of grain that was then shipped out to the rest of the Roman Empire. And then we have Asia Minor, aka Anatolia, what you would think of as modern-day Turkey. And just with an eye to the future, this will remain a very important province in Roman history, all the way through the entire Eastern Roman Empire, the entire Byzantine Empire. Asia Minor, Anatolia, which is, the whole region, will remain important, a very key region to Rome, and it will really become one of the central regions of the Eastern Roman Empire.
The Mediterranean area of Syria, particularly the city of Antioch, was of secondary but still considerable importance.
That makes sense.
The emperor's second objective was...
That makes a lot of sense. We talk about how Asia Minor has that important tax revenue. It's also, a little, some of these areas are sort of borderlands. It's a little more integrated into the empire. And then Egypt with its prosperity in grain shipments. Syria, sort of the heart of the Palmyrene Empire. It does have some very important cities. Palmyra itself, Antioch, Damascus, of course. But I think Aurelian is exactly right it is not necessarily the top concern. Now, it's still very concerning, but it might be third on the list.
To eliminate Zenobia and to reduce the power of Palmyra so as to avoid a repeat of this dangerous situation.
Right.
However, Aurelian knew that Syria would be heavily defended and that a prolonged war there was possible. This would prevent him from reaching Egypt by land, which he urgently needed to recover to secure a steady flow of grain, as well as revenues from the Red Sea trade. This was the main reason for his ambitious naval invasion to open a second front.
Yeah. And, it really does show you the main concerns of Aurelian with how he's approaching this. So, Palmyra was important, as we saw, because it was this point through which a lot of trade passed, particularly trade from the east to the west and from the west to the east, right? This sort of what we might today call international trade that came through the Sassanid Empire into Rome, and of course came from even further east than that. We have the whole Silk Road network further to the east that sort of flowed in through a couple of different areas, but Palmyra was a very important trade city, and yet Aurelian prioritizes Egypt. He prioritizes Egypt because it is more key to the domestic situation of the Roman Empire. What he is most concerned about is, backing away from chaos, returning to a sense of stability and security, and to do that, what is more important is securing these grain shipments, feeding people. The trade is important too, absolutely. Palmyra, that is something to be very concerned about. But first and foremost, you want to secure that tax revenue and the grain. So it makes sense why those are at the top of his list, given the circumstances that he is dealing with.
The Roman fleet reached the Nile Delta sometime in the spring of 272. Very little is known about the campaign itself. Upon making landfall, Probus initially fought with success, but was then nearly captured. Further reinforcements helped him gain a foothold against the Palmyrene garrison, and by early June, Alexandria was safely back in Aurelian's control. Probus then began operations to retake the rest of Egypt. Meanwhile, after crossing into Asia Minor, the advancing Roman column was triumphantly welcomed by the inhabitants of Bithynia, who had successfully resisted Zenobia's domination. In Galatia, any Palmyrene troops stationed there were certainly not numerous enough to stop Aurelian's army, and they quickly withdrew to the southeast, bringing valuable intelligence about Aurelian's advance.
Oh.
With the loose Palmyrene hegemony evaporating before him, the emperor was welcomed without a struggle by the citizens of Ancyra.
There you go.
The provincial.
And I think they were highlighting a second before that this must be the modern-day city of Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey today. If that gives you any sort of reference. But, we talked about the powerful Palmyrene Empire, and it absolutely was powerful. It was expanding, but when you're comparing it to the might of the Roman Empire, especially a Roman Empire that has got its shit together under Aurelian, he can start pushing inwards. And some of those territories that were sort of on the, frontier of the Palmyrene Empire, they don't hold too much control over them. It's not too difficult for Rome to reestablish its hegemony over these regions. Now, to take over Egypt and especially Syria, that's going to be more challenging. These are more central to Palmyra, more well defended.
Capital. After making sure that his supply lines were secure, from here he proceeded southeast towards the Cilician Gates, a chasmic pass through the Taurus Mountains that connected the Anatolian Plateau with the Cilician Plains and Syria beyond.
The Taurus Mountains are and will continue to be a very important geographical feature in the region, both during, the unified Roman Empire and then the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire afterwards. It's a really important sort of separation point east from west. So yeah, Taurus Mountains, there's something to keep an eye on, an important geographical feature of the region.
However, before he could reach the pass, his route took him to the town of Tyana in Cappadocia, which was strategically located along the route to Syria. The town refused to open its gates, but Aurelian could not afford to leave a hostile garrison along his lines of supply.
It's my understanding that Aurelian was going pretty smoothly through a lot of these cities. They were giving up, or he was finding easy conquest, and he reaches Tyana, and they want to put up a fight.
Angered, he ordered the city besieged, pledging that he would not leave even a dog alive once the city had fallen.
Damn, what they do.
Desirous of plunder, his soldiers pursued the siege with all the more determination. The machine-like manner with which the Romans slowly choked the city over the course of several weeks spread fear among some sections of the population. With the pressure mounting, Tyana capitulated when one of the frightened residents betrayed the city to the emperor by showing to him a weakness in the wall. The capital of Cappadocia was now in the emperor's hands.
Yep.
But Aurelian thought better of his previous intention to massacre Tyana. With an insight rare among 3rd century emperors, he realized that sparing the city would set a precedent far more potent in the coming conflict.
Yeah, and I think there's some story about a vision or an oracle or something like that, but they're absolutely correct in pointing out that this sort of insight was rare during this era. I mean, the crisis of the 3rd century was so chaotic, so violent, that everybody was prone to just maximum destruction. Mercy was not in the minds of many people during the crisis of the 3rd century, right? And so Aurelian, not to say he was making some grand humanitarian gesture, but the thought process might have been, we don't know what the thought process was, the thought process might have been, well, if we show our might against Tyana, we besiege them, we show that we can take them over, and when they surrender, we show them mercy, well, that might encourage some of these other cities that perhaps they would have resisted out of fear or to protect themselves. If we show that we can be merciful, maybe these other cities will be more willing to surrender, as we come closer to Syria, closer to the heartland of the Palmyrene Empire. Of course, more resistance will be encountered. So if we can show these cities that, we're coming, we're powerful, the Roman advance is inevitable, but we can be merciful, they might be willing to just step down.
He ordered his army not to harm Tyana, thus presenting himself to the populace as a liberator rather than a conqueror.
Right.
But his troops were none too pleased.
Uh-oh.
They expected to be allowed to plunder the city and angrily demanded that Aurelian stand by his promise. This was indeed a dangerous move. Amidst the heightened political...
Yeah, this is a dangerous move. Now, we've talked about sort of the benefits of that decision, but one of the things you have to remember is that at this point in Roman history, the army, the military, is such an important contingent, such an important constituency to the emperor that he will often put them above anybody else because, well, if you lose the army, you're done for. I mean, you'll probably be found dead the next day. So it is really important to keep the loyalty of the legions. And so Aurelian, he is playing with fire in this instance.
Military tensions of the 3rd century, many an emperor and usurper were lynched by their own soldiers for refusing plunder.
Yeah.
That Aurelian managed to survive this encounter reflects his ability to foster strong relations with his soldiers at a time when armies were prone to rebellion against their commanders. Not allowing himself to be intimidated by his men, the emperor admitted that he had indeed ordered that no dog in Tyana be allowed to live. Accordingly, he ordered his soldiers to kill all dogs in the city.
Not the dogs.
The anger of the soldiers was dispelled by their laughter at this response.
Oh, okay. Humor doesn't always translate, but apparently to them that was absolutely hilarious. So a witty response from Aurelian doesn't, really translate into our modern parlance, but clearly it got him out of that situation.
Aurelian went on to explain his decision to the troops. We waged war to free these cities. If we pillage them, they will never trust us. This display of sound political judgment showed that he understood that Zenobia was a formidable foe.
I imagine, though, and we can see his reasoning there, it makes sense, but you got to imagine that something else was offered to the troops. I don't think they would have just accepted the argument. Either this shows a really strong loyalty to Aurelian himself, and I think a belief that loyalty would be paid out sometime in the future, or Aurelian promised more riches down the road. I'm willing to bet that was a part of it, because just with the state of the military during this era, reasoned argument was just not enough. Now, sure, sort of impassioned and impressive leadership could take you a long way, but I think some promises of money, some bribes basically, would also have had to be presented in one way or another.
And that he had better chances of defeating her through clemency rather than terror. With the capture of Tyana, the way to Syria now lay open. Aurelian's army marched into Cilicia without resistance, likely passing through Tarsus, the provincial capital, before heading east through Issus, where Alexander the Great had won his famous victory over the Persians.
Yeah.
From here, the Roman emperor reached the port of Alexandretta. Although he had gained control over Asia Minor with relative ease, before him now lay Syria, the heartland of Palmyrene power.
Here we go. Yeah, so, as I said, we've seen Aurelian make his way through Asia Minor, wielding both military force, sort of the might of the Roman Empire, and also mercy in one way or another, in order to make it pretty smoothly to the heartland of the Palmyrene Empire. But now it gets a little more complicated, I think he's gonna actually have to fight it out now. It's gonna be more complicated, probably more difficult, now that he has reached the heart of Palmyra. They're probably more willing to defend that than they had been willing to defend, say, Asia Minor.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, Probus managed to topple the resistance and regain control of the province. He then proceeded to march towards the Levant. He pressed the Palmyrenes from the south and perhaps secured the loyalty of the Cyrenian Third Legion in Arabia, which had been previously subdued and its general killed by Zenobia. To address this, Zabdas detached a considerable force in anticipation of Probus's advance on Palmyra.
Wow, okay.
Having lost Alexandria, the queen now had one remaining mint under her control in Antioch. Knowing that this would be Aurelian's first objective in Syria, it was here that she and her generals stationed Palmyra's forces in preparation for the Roman advance.
I mean, it looks like we haven't gotten a troop breakdown. I don't know if we're going to, judging from what we're seeing here. It looks like the Palmyrene force under Zabdas might have actually outnumbered the Roman force under Aurelian. I'm not sure how many men the Palmyrene Empire was able to mobilize. Of course, they have far less resources to draw on than Aurelian does, but they also don't have a massive empire falling apart that they have to worry about. We mentioned how Aurelian had to leave significant numbers of troops along several different borders, especially in the Balkans and along the border of the Gallic Empire, in order to keep the empire defended. Whereas, Zenobia is dealing with a much smaller empire, And we've already seen that she didn't put up too much resistance to Asia Minor and Egypt being taken. She's really focusing on Syria. So perhaps that consolidation allows her to mobilize more troops than Aurelian has at this particular moment. I don't know, maybe they'll go into that.
Aurelian's army consisted of legionary detachments.
I shouldn't have said anything, they're going right into it.
Drawn from Rhaetia, Noricum, Pannonia, and Moesia, as well as Praetorians and Moorish and Dalmatian cavalry, who served as elite mounted units. Zabda's army consisted of Palmyrene and other Syrians, but also various other Roman units that had declared their loyalty to Queen Zenobia's family. Palmyra's greatest advantage over Aurelian's army was their Klebanari, or super heavy cavalry. These mounted units were better armored and more numerous than Aurelian's Dalmatians and Moors. The Roman emperor began crossing over the mountains.
Okay, interesting. So, Aurelian is outnumbered in this case. Not massively outnumbered, but still absolutely worth noting, outnumbered pretty significantly. And apparently the Palmyrene cavalry had an advantage. They were better armored. On the screen it showed both had 7,000, but they said more numerous, so it's looking like the Palmyrene force has a lot of advantages. Let's see what Aurelian can manage to get done here.
He had received unwelcome reports that the Palmyrenes lay between him and Antioch. Zabdas drew up his army in the Orontes plain on the western side of the Lake of Antioch to the north of the city. Here he could intercept Aurelian's advance along the road from Alexandretta at a narrow point where the flat terrain was especially well suited to the battle tactics of the Palmyrene heavy mailed cavalry. However, Aurelian refused to fight Zabdas on the battlefield of his own choosing. Knowing that a direct assault would be to surrender operational and tactical advantage to the enemy, he instead decided to march to the east of the lake, seeking to outflank the Palmyrene position.
Okay.
This maneuver had 3 advantages. First, the Palmyrenes anticipated a frontal assault from the north and might become confused by an attack from their rear. Second, he would block the enemy's line of retreat to the east, and if he could reach the city, he could also close off the road leading south. Lastly, the terrain south of the lake was less suited to Zabda's formidable cataphracts. However, the Palmyrene...
Alright, Aurelian is thinking tactically about this situation. He's seen the Palmyrene force and their advantages, and he's trying to seize the initiative back. Don't do what they expect, take a different route. Smart stuff.
General got wind of Aurelian's maneuver. Having already stationed a small contingent to guard the road to Beroia, he sent his elite heavy cavalry to bolster their ranks. He could ill afford to lose his line of retreat, so it was imperative that they intercept Aurelian's army on the plain to the east of the lake before they could reach the hilly terrain further south, where his cavalry would be at a disadvantage. The Emperor's scouts soon brought back reports of Palmyrene movements. Realizing he had lost the element of surprise, Aurelian led most of his cavalry ahead of the main body of the army. He was well aware of the fearsome reputation of the Klebanari and did not want to risk his infantry against Zabdas's heavy cavalry.
Alright, I mean, Aurelian was a cavalryman himself. We talked about his career prior to being emperor, so he's certainly skilled in this type of combat, but it seems like the Palmyrene force is pretty impressive.
It was a hot June morning. The Roman emperor marched at pace well ahead of the rest of the army, with a cavalry contingent of around 5,000 strong, hoping to outflank Zabdas at Antioch.
Alright,
With him, he had the veteran Dalmatian and Moorish light cavalry, which had been under Aurelian's command for a number of years before he became emperor, serving as the elite cavalry arm of the Roman army. They were a tactically astute branch of the military, capable of executing battle plans across vast distances with precision, and had participated in numerous campaigns, often being the deciding factor in major engagements.
Yeah, well, Aurelian's cavalry force, and sort of these elite cavalry forces more broadly during this time period, had become really essential to the Roman military, and really essential to the defense of Roman territory. You know, with how quickly they could move, with how, we know cavalry, a sort of relatively small number of cavalry compared to, say, the number of infantrymen you have can be decisive in a battle, especially if well trained, well coordinated, well commanded. And so you can sort of start to understand why, like I said, a cavalry force like this or other elite cavalry forces were becoming really key, really important in a time of such chaos.
However, Aurelian found that his way was blocked by the Palmyrene heavily armoured cavalry, arrayed on the Antioch-Beroia road. Zabdas's cataphracts were of even better quality than Aurelian's Dalmatians and Moors. These troops had been forged in the fire of the Persian wars, and perhaps represented the very pinnacle of cavalry warfare.
That is a very good point. We've seen how Aurelian's force is elite and well-trained and experienced. And I was thinking, damn, the Palmyrenes can do better than that? Well, like they said, they've been forged in the fire of pretty extensive warfare with the Sassanid Persians. We looked at that last episode. One of the ways that, Palmyra had sort of built up its power in the region was taking on the Sassanid Persians repeatedly, while still remaining loyal to the Roman Empire. And so, yeah, we're talking about some well-trained and well-experienced cavalrymen here.
In the 3rd century AD, it is likely that Zabdas fielded up to 5,000 of these troops at Immae, but their exact strength and composition remains unclear. The Palmyrenes traditionally used light cavalry and dromedary archers, so it is possible that these heavy cavalry units were not local and were in fact cataphracts of the Roman army in the east, which were controlled by Queen Zenobia. Rome employed such units as an answer to Persian cataphracts.
Yeah, well, the Persians had been known for their strong, heavy cavalry, right? And so it sort of made sense to me that perhaps the Palmyrenes had taken inspiration from that, influence from that, maybe learned from that. Like they said, their traditional cavalry was more light. And so it would sort of make sense how they've evolved into that heavy cavalry force over time.
And they would have been controlled by Zenobia's husband before he was assassinated. This further confirms that the conflict between Rome and Palmyra was, in fact, a civil war. Despite this, ancient sources descended from Aurelian's propaganda portrayed Palmyra as an external enemy, even though they were an integral part of the empire for centuries.
Yeah, though, to be honest, I mean, sure, I think it's worth distinguishing between conflict within the empire and conflict coming from outside the empire. But at this point, I'm not sure if it makes too much of a difference. If we look at the crisis of the 3rd century, sure, there are plenty of threats from outside the empire, but a lot of the threats come from within the empire. We're talking about usurpers, rebels, breakaway states like the Gallic Empire or the Palmyrene Empire. So sure, Romans are serving on both sides, and Palmyra had been a part of the Roman Empire, but that's a pretty common thing for this era. It's not like that's too different from a lot of the other stuff that we've seen.
Further evidence of this propaganda can be seen in their portrayal of Zenobia as an Eastern barbarian, a foreigner, despite her family having senatorial status.
Yeah, well, the Romans like to do this, and by the Romans, I'm talking about, your real elite, sort of central Romans, I guess. We might still be talking about Italian Romans at this point. The Romans who would see themselves as the most Roman. They like to do this thing where, yeah, sure, all of you in the rest of the empire, you provincials, you can serve in our armies and defend our empire and, serve as loyal legionaries, but, yeah, we don't really see you as that Roman. You're still kind of barbarians to us. So, there's this sort of complicated dance between Roman identity and then sort of being a quote-unquote barbarian. It was not cut and dry. It was a little complicated. Someone like Zenobia is a good example. She could easily be framed as this sort of foreign Eastern queen, but as they're pointing out, in many ways, she was part of the Roman establishment until she broke away. So that framing of her as this sort of foreign entity is not really entirely accurate.
The fact that she was of Syrian descent was clearly used against her by the central imperial government. Aurelian presented Zenobia's son as an illegitimate ruler, but ironically, it was Aurelian himself who lacked senatorial status before he took power. He was an...
Yeah, once again, and I think I mentioned this last time, there's the question of legitimacy, right? Who is the legitimate ruler of the empire? And at this point, legitimacy is basically enforced. Legitimacy goes to basically whoever has the biggest army and who can enforce their own legitimacy. In the past, it might have come from the endorsement of the Senate, or maybe popularity amongst the people, or whatever, but those things are just not as important anymore. And so, any Roman emperor will want to claim legitimacy. That absolutely makes sense. But it is always very sort of funny and hypocritical when they start attacking the legitimacy of others. Usurpers, people like Zenobia and her son, because a lot of these Roman emperors really have no leg to stand on. They're not very legitimate themselves, but, once again, legitimacy is sort of a made-up concept. It's just whoever is legitimate is whoever we see as legitimate. And so Aurelian is trying to seize that concept and claim it for himself and keep, Zenobia out of it.
A Illyrian general who killed his way to the throne, overthrowing Quintilius, and, according to some sources, he played a role in the assassination of Emperor Gallienus.
Right, so, where does the legitimacy come in there? Now, some emperors will sort of get that legitimacy over time. Maybe they'll get the approval of the Senate or the people or whatever. But at this point, if you're making your way to that position of Roman emperor, there's a really good chance that you had to do some shady stuff to get there. You did not make your way up through the, official approved channels.
Aurelian did eventually get senatorial support, but he had earned it through brute force.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Likewise, the troops from both armies used to be part of the Roman military before the war. At Immae, the two commanders fielded their best mounted contingents, both understanding the importance of the opening encounter. Around mid-morning, Aurelian gave the signal.
All right, here we go.
On the other end, Zabdas rose to the challenge. Undoubtedly, the heavily armored cataphracts were encouraged, seeing the light Dalmatian and Moorish cavalry. Little did they know that Aurelian was one of the finest cavalry commanders of his time.
That he was.
Just before the first charge of the
He's had a lot of experience.
enemy, he instructed his men to wheel about and not risk close quarters combat with their heavier counterparts.
And I feel like I often point this out when it comes to military maneuvers, but I always feel like it's worth pointing out. That may seem to us, looking in from above, a relatively simple maneuver. You know, you turn around, you go backwards. And, I mean, I guess in the most sort of technical sense, it is simple, but in order to perform that maneuver is very difficult, very complicated, and takes a very well-trained force who are loyal and listen to a good commander. You know, any sort of maneuver in the heat of combat is difficult, especially a maneuver that requires your men to turn around and wheel backwards, not engage in combat, because when people start running forwards, or in this case start riding forwards, all they want to do is attack. And also the next challenge is when people start riding backwards away from the enemy, you know, sometimes they're seized by an impulse to keep moving away. So this is a difficult maneuver to perform, as all maneuvers are. Takes a lot of coordination and discipline. Absolutely a testament to the skill and discipline of these men and the skill and experience of Aurelian as a commander.
The light-armed cavalry feigned retreat, inviting the enemy to give chase. This encouraged the Palmyrines to press forward in anticipation of an easy victory. Whenever a minor clash occurred, Aurelian's lighter units would flee. With each charge of Zabdas's cataphracts, the nimble Dalmatians and Moors used their speed to avoid the confrontation and retreat along the main road towards the town of Immae.
Brilliant. So I'm not quite sure where this is going, but we talked about how the Palmyrene cavalry has this advantage. They are this strong, heavy cavalry, in contrast to Aurelian, but his lighter cavalry is using that to their advantage. They're more nimble, they're more quick, they can perform these feigned retreats, well, in part because of their training and their discipline, but in part because they are more lightly armored than the Palmyrene force.
The Palmyrines pursued the Romans for several kilometers. Soon enough, the Syrian midday sun began taking its toll.
Yeah, they're gonna get worn down, I imagine, with all that heavy armor and all that charging forward.
True to the word, Clibonarius, meaning oven man, the Palmyrene Clibonari and their horses suffered in the heat,
That's funny.
having maintained the chase in their heavy armor.
Yep.
Aurelian noticed the exhaustion of the enemy. On cue, he turned his cavalry and countercharged the pursuers. Taken by surprise, the Clibonari could not put up an effective resistance, nor flee their nimble enemy. The slaughter was terrible. The tired heavy horsemen were either slain in their saddles or thrown off their horses and mangled by the hooves of friend and foe.
Damn.
Few managed to escape the carnage and find their way back to Antioch.
I mean, I would say we just got a masterclass in cavalry warfare, cavalry tactics. And, you know, what else would you expect from Aurelian? I think this is a good showcase of his skill, experience, and leadership.
Aurelian's tactics at Immae relied on the veteran Dalmatian and Moorish cavalry, their steely discipline, courage, and their ability to coordinate an effective and timely counterattack after retreating a great distance. Their deadly efficiency demonstrated the Emperor...
And I'm sure, we talked about this earlier, I'm sure now you can really see why these elite cavalry forces became so important to the Roman Empire. I mean, look at how well trained, how disciplined, how well coordinated they were. You know, we saw it here, but it's easy to imagine in a variety of circumstances how they could really change the course of a battle.
His tactical expertise, as well as his experience as a cavalry commander. In one fell swoop, he had dealt a crippling blow to Palmyra's most powerful military asset, their vaunted heavily armored cavalry. However, further to the south, the Palmyrines still possessed cavalry that far outnumbered those available to the Emperor, including a reserve of cataphracts. Aurelian knew that the battle had by no means secured the defeat of Zenobia's regime,
Nope.
and that the outcome of the war was yet to be decided.
It ain't over yet.
Credit goes to our
Alrighty.
awesome patron.
Fantastic video. I've been enjoying seeing the exploits of Aurelian, beloved by many. I'm sure you can see why. He's certainly a very talented character. Great. It looks like we're really digging into the conflict with the Palmyrene Empire, which makes sense. I mean, that was a big part of Aurelian's reign, and we will be continuing that in the next episode. So if you guys enjoyed this one, please leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon. It is linked down below. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.